Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for joining us today with Islam in our modern world. We have come here today to discuss just that, Islam in our modern world. How can we reconcile our religious beliefs with an ever-changing Western society? So if you guys want to give a brief introduction, and then let's dive right into it.
My name is Bashar. I'm a full-time student here in the United States. And besides being student, and I try to look at life with different perspectives, and I like to ponder upon my existence. I'm looking forward to have a very constructive dialogue here.
Oh, great. And I'm glad to join you both for this kind of conversation, if you will. My name's Dr. Adnan Zulfiqar, Professor Adnan Zulfiqar. I'm a professor of law at Rutgers University in New Jersey. Over there, in addition to having a degree in a JD, a Juris Doctor in law, in American law, I also have a PhD in Islamic studies. And specifically, I focus a lot on Islamic law, the history of Islamic law, but Islam in general as well. In addition to that, my learning journey, my sort of knowledge journey is outside of American academia as well. I've spent time in the Arab world, in Syria and other places, and as well as in Pakistan, studying Islam in what you would say are more traditional settings, one-on-one with various teachers, etc. So it's been a long journey that started probably over 2 decades ago, and I'm still a student, still learning. Always kind of feel like I'm in grade 1. But I think that's part of the journey of trying to learn. So, I'm happy to have this conversation with you guys to share whatever insights I might be able to, while fully recognizing as well that there's only one entity in the world that has supreme knowledge, and that's Allah Ta'ala. The rest of us are just trying to make do as best we can.
Thank you, Dr. Zulfiqar, for being here on the show. And I really appreciate your efforts to take time for us today and maybe answer some of our questions. So we would like to conduct this dialogue in a constructive way so that we can reach at some point. So as Shariq mentioned, the theme of this discussion, I would start here with a very basic question, that the natural course of this world has proven to be destructive. The most evident behavior, if you look back, that son of Adam killed his brother, and from there on we have seen wars in the world history. The humans have always been fighting with each other, and they are more prone towards the wrong choices. Although we do have a chance to adapt the good choices, but how in this era of hyper-exposure, youngsters who are exposed to so many wrong choices and very less adapted to the right choices, how are they going to find a balance between the world and the religion?
Yeah, you started off with a tough question.
Yeah, that's a lot. Huh?
That's a lot, right? Yeah. But let me provide a few sort of thoughts on this and then try to address what you've said. So I think the first thing we have to bear in mind, and look, I'm going to be providing you sort of perspective that I've gained from the study of... You started off with a tough question.
Yeah, that's a lot. Huh?
That's a lot, right? Yeah. But let me provide a few sort of thoughts on this and then try to address what you've said. So I think the first thing we have to bear in mind, and look, I'm going to be providing you sort of perspective that I've gained from the study of Islam, and so from an Islamic perspective, but then also just in general, because some of these topics require some clarity that's even outside of religion itself. So the first thing to bear in mind is, as Muslims, we have a belief that God has given us free will. That one of the things that we have been bestowed with is the freedom to make choices. Allah Ta'ala tells us in the Quran, if He wanted, could have made all of us believers. But that wasn't a route that God chose, right? God said, no, I'm going to give you freedom to make choices, and authority that goes with that. And in fact, we know in the Quran that the passage where the angels kind of in a moment of questioning of God, said, wait, why are you going to do this? Why would you give people freedom and kind of authority or power, whatever else? Because it's going to lead to bloodshed.
And that's what the angel said.
The angel said that to God. And Allah Ta'ala's response is, I know what you don't know, right? And so from a framing perspective, this is important for a couple reasons. Mainly, that one of the ways Muslims operate in the world is with an understanding that in all my searches, in all my desire to acquire knowledge, etc., I'm always cognizant of the fact that my knowledge has limits and that there's wisdom beyond my own. Right? So the operating framework, and it's an important one, because in dialogue with other folks who may not be Muslim, sometimes you'll come to a sticking point and it rests on the fact that they don't have a sense of any wisdom or any knowledge that's greater than their own. And I remember actually being overseas and as part of kind of my training at Damascus University. And I was in a course, there were some other American students there, and we were having this discussion. It was the Arabic language, and so it's all happening in Arabic, and we're having this discussion, and I was posed a question by this class with regard to something related to Islam, or why does Islam do this, and I had to begin by saying, look, like I'm happy to answer that, but you have to understand the frame I'm coming from. You may not end up being satisfied with my eventual answer, but you have to understand that our frames are different. I believe that there's wisdom beyond my own, that there's something transcendent, there's a knowledge that I can't acquire, and I'm comfortable and content with that. You don't have that belief. And so as a result, you're at points going to want answers that are beyond my jurisdiction, beyond my pay grade, if you will. So that's an important framing. The second thing I wanted to say, though, is the way you characterized sort of human history and all. It's accurate to some degree. But the truth of human history is that there's far more balance, right, than simply warfare, bloodshed, etc. If we look at human history, we also have so many examples, and daily examples, of how much good human beings do, right? How much kindness and generosity they show. If you look around the world today, yes, of course, there's warfare, but I would argue that there's far more charity. There are far more people who are giving up their lives to do good for other people, right? And we don't always see it because it's like the news, right? No one ever shows the good news. When you turn on the news in the evening, there's never like good news on there. Maybe one heartwarming story. Oftentimes they're telling you who's gotten robbed, who's gotten killed, what happened here, what problems, there's warfare, etc. But at the same time that you have had warfare, you've had people like Abdul Sattar Idi who've existed. You've had the Mother Teresas who've existed. You have organizations like Save the Children or the various United Nations agencies for children, for health, etc. We've cured disease. We've gone in and where areas where there's famine, we've intervened there to help, right? You see an earthquake that happens in Turkey and Syria, and millions of dollars are being raised by human beings who have no connection to the region at all, like zero, right? Little children in some random part of the United States are putting together their pocket money in order to go and help some kids or some people who are impacted by an earthquake far away. So I only offer that to say human history contains both. And sometimes we get overwhelmed with all the bloodshed, and that fills up history books because it makes for a more fascinating story in some respects.
Well, I think it's more gripping, right? If
more gripping, right?
If I was nice to you and I was kind to you, you'd be like, okay, he's a normal guy.
Yeah.
But if I came and did something like bad to you, it would stick in your mind. You'd remember that.
Look at Google reviews, for instance, or like Yelp reviews, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have a good experience at a hotel, like maybe if it's an amazing experience, you might write something. Mm-hmm. If you have a really bad one, you're like, oh man, I need to tell other people about it.
An essay,
right? So I think human history functions a bit like that too, and I think we have to be careful not to have a completely pessimistic view of it, right? That in fact, there are examples there of sort of that other side of human being.
Okay, so what I'm getting from your point, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's not only just destruction being happening, but there's also constructive side to it. And they both work and move in balance. That what you're trying to say?
Yeah, absolutely, right? Because otherwise, human history would have taken a very different course, right? If selfishness was just the overwhelming sentiment, if people were just selfish and that's it, then they would come up with a cure and be like, yeah, we're only going to use it for our particular people here. Or like here in America, just rich people, 0.2%, that's it. But we see that that's not often the case, right? That like human beings can and often are much more generous and selfless than we give them credit for. Sometimes, in fact, if you look at it, human beings it is valued so much that they are people who do philanthropy and do charity solely to be seen as someone who does charity, right?
And it probably helps with their taxes as well.
It might help with their taxes,
like that,
but like oftentimes it doesn't help enough for them to do that. But even if they're doing it for purely selfish reasons, those selfish reasons are what? Are that, hey, I want to be seen as that type of person because society values that, right? Society values the person who is seen as kind of selfless and generous, etc. There are very few people, there's some examples, right? But people who are just like, yeah, I'm going to be selfish and greedy and I'm going to project that to the world, right? That's the image I want the world to have of me. We understand fundamentally, I think internally, within our fitra, that that's not actually, we want people to have a good perception of us, and that good perception is going to come from these values of generosity, of kindness, etc., whether they're genuine or not. We want that perception to exist, right? So I think that's indicative of a bit of how human existence contains that destruction, certainly. But even in moments of that destruction, you have sort of that human spirit of goodness that also exists. And we have countless stories, even from war zones, right? I'll take an example of Syria. Syria has been engaged for almost a decade now in war, which, wherever you fall in it, but essentially where there's a regime that's, at war with its own people, or a portion of its people.
Revolution,
essentially, right? Somewhat. And in that process, you have individuals who, they were farmers, they were construction, or whatever else, who, because bombardment was happening, buildings would fall, they had to start rescuing people. And so they created a group called the White Helmets. And all they do is they go and try to rescue people out of buildings. Like, in the middle of warfare, you have that type of stuff which inspires you as a human being to say, wow, like people can be that selfless, right? That they give everything up, put themselves in danger in order to
They're not necessarily directly gaining anything. In fact, they're losing, really. They're sacrificing themselves very often.
Many of them will die. They're doing it without proper equipment most of the time. Now there's a little bit, some funding that comes to it. But like, oftentimes they're just doing it and no one's going to recognize them.
But I would say there has to be a reward there, whether it's the feeling that they get or, we can't really know, right? But I would assume there's some natural reward there.
Presumably,
some fulfillment that comes from.
Presumably there's a reward. Presumably there's a notion of some level of responsibility that you have to the collective, right? That you feel some obligation that you owe to other people, simply because you live in that community, right? Yeah. So for instance, like, you might live in a neighborhood. You may see somebody on the street, may say hi to them, may not have much more of a relationship than simply, hey, how are you doing? Oh, the weather's nice, your lawn's looking good, whatever else. But in some situation, if they were in trouble, like, you would feel some responsibility, right? If you saw them in trouble, the average human being, if you saw someone fall down, your inclination is not to, oh, that sucks, and keep walking. Right? Your inclination is like, oh, let me help you up. Even though we don't have a deep friendship, we're not necessarily kin, you're not my relative. Like most human beings say, okay, let me help them up, right?
I think part of it is like an idealistic belief of this is how things should be. This is how we should operate. You should do this for me the same way that I will do this for you.
Yeah, I think partly in your mind is like you would want that to be done. But I think partly there is something internal to us that recognizes, yeah, in that moment, that's the right thing to do. And so you have so many moments where you have the unassuming hero, right? Someone who wasn't a hero their entire life, but some moment came up that they were put in and they decided to take certain steps, right, that made them a hero in the world's eyes. You have an example in France some years back. There was a French West African immigrant. Well, he wasn't French at that stage. He was just a West African immigrant. And there was a child that was like dangling or something from one of the balconies. And this man who was just like kind of walking by sees this. He climbed up the side of this building to go rescue the child. Like why? There was no history of this man being some hero or anything prior to that. There was something internal to him.
Maybe he didn't even know how to climb before that.
Maybe he didn't know.
He probably never climbed anything.
Yeah, in that moment, there was something inside him that said, no, this is...
He made a choice.
He made a choice.
Exactly.
What I'm getting from you is there is a constructive side, there is a destructive side. Being human, we do have freedom of choices that the Creator has granted us.
Yes.
And it's up to us to make a right or a wrong choice. We do know the reality of the situation and like, is it good, is it bad? But it's upon us to make a right choice at the right moment.
Yes, and that is, and I would even say a little further, that I think that God has inclined us to go the right way, right? That we have an inclination there, but we don't always choose that path.
Well, I think you see the choice thing is exactly what I was thinking. You see maybe within that second, you have a choice, and if you walk away, there's going to be a dead baby on the street, and then you're going to have to live with that.
That's it, right there.
That reality that you created.
You have to live with that, right? Now, if you were a callous person, if you were just a destructive person, you'd be like, all right, whatever. That's not going to weigh on my conscience, right? I don't care. But you do, right? As a human being, you care, and you care about doing the right thing. You care about being perceived as someone who is good, right? There's very few people who care, or who project themselves out there that, I want to be perceived as bad. Even folks who maybe we all agree, hey, man, it's a pretty evil person, they want to project that they're good, right? So I think human beings have not only just a choice, but they incline towards good, but that doesn't always manifest in reality.
Even a bad, selfish person is ultimately just trying to be very good to themselves. They're trying to do everything for themselves instead of anybody else, right?
But it's interesting, even with those bad, selfish people, you examine the totality of their life, I think you would struggle not to find moments where they were actually selfless towards somebody else. Maybe in a small way, maybe it's like their some loved one of theirs or their child or whatever else. So they're terrible with society, but with their own child, they still incline towards good, right?